everyone, it's Jennifer from Flux. Welcome back to part 2 of our 2022 Flux summer crochet along. I am so excited about this project. This is the Island Hopper bag. It is a fun, very generous summer bag that you can use all summer long. And we are going to be crocheting today. So we're going to be making 2 panels. So each handle here is a panel. Later we'll be sewing it in a different part of our crochet along, but today we're going to be crocheting the panels of our bag. Now just to recap, last week we talked about the supplies and a little bit of an intro to the project. This week, again, like I mentioned, we're going to be crocheting our 2 panels, and then for part 3 of our crochet along, we're going to be seaming it together to create a bag, and then for part 4, we're going to be creating this fun removable charm. Now this is totally optional, but I do think it adds a little bit of like summery fun to our bag. It has a clip on here so you can take it off. So here's kind of what the bag looks like without it, if you want it to be a plain bag, or with the charm. And we're going to work on that later on in our crochet along. This is super easy, very simple stitches. And last week, like I mentioned, very easy to substitute yarn if you need to use something a little bit different. So let's jump right in, and we're going to learn how to crochet the 2 panels of our bag next. Now, one more thing I wanted to mention is if you haven't joined the Ravelry group and the Facebook group, be sure and hop over there. The links are down below, and that's where all the makers kind of hang out. You can ask questions, you can show off your work. It's a really fun place to see what everybody's doing. So definitely join those if you haven't joined those yet. So let's jump right in and crochet our bag panels next. So for today's tutorial, like I mentioned, we're going to be making our crocheted panel. Now we're going to need 2 because we're going to sandwich them together in the next part of our tutorial for our cowl. Not today, but we're just going to make the crochet part. So I already made one here just to show you what it looks like. And I have the second handle, and we're going to learn how to crochet around this handle and add, as you can see, where it kind of flares out here and here. We're going to add some stitch markers and create an increase so it will grow. Okay, so for today's tutorial, you're going to need one of your handles. You're going to need your yarn. Now again, we're using a full ball of yarn per panel. I have just a little tiny bit here. It's enough to seam later when we're ready to seam. And then you'll need your scissors to cut the yarn when needed, and 2 removable stitch markers. Now I did mention when we learned about the supplies last part of our cowl, you can use a scrap piece of yarn if you don't have removable stitch markers, but something just to mark your spots here and here so we know where to increase. And then again, you'll need your 6.5 millimeter K crochet hook. I'll put the link down below for this. This is my Furls Odyssey in black, and I have a coupon code too if you'd like to get one. So I'm going to scoot this over. We can kind of keep it nearby for reference, but I'm going to scoot this over. We're going to start, oh, there's another stitch marker. They're kind of popping up everywhere. We're going to start by, now this is the end that I wove as I went along, and we'll trim that later. But we're going to crochet right onto this handle and start building our panel, okay? So I'm just going to scoot this whole thing out of the way, and if we need to refer to it, we'll just slide it back over. And we're going to grab our handle, and then we're going to grab our yarn. So what we're going to do to start is we're going to, I got a little bit extra out just to give us something to work with. And I'm going to zoom in so you can see what I'm doing a little bit better here. And we're going to grab our hook. So what you want to do first is to grab your handle, and you're just going to tie, leaving a nice tail. This will be this tail eventually up here. But you're going to tie it right onto your handle, leaving a nice tail that you can kind of work with later. So just tie it on nice and snug. Once and then twice is perfectly fine. And just make sure it's really snug on there. Just like that, okay? Now we're going to hold this tail along the edge as we work, just to incorporate it, and it'll be one less step for us later. So what we want to do is we want to go into the center of the ring with our hook, and we're going to grab that yarn. So reach back and kind of scoop up the yarn and bring up a loop, okay? Then we're going to just chain 1 and go right into that loop, okay? All right, now pushing things over. Next, we're going to work 32 single crochets into the center of this ring, okay? And we're going to do each one together. So this takes a little bit of dexterity here because you're holding a tail along the edges you work. You're holding a big giant wood ring and you're working single crochets. So just go nice and slow and see how in this panel here that I have, see how everything's nice and neat and pushed together? We can push things in as we go along. If you see some wood in between, don't worry about it so much. We can always kind of smush it back together, okay? All right, so what you'll want to do, holding that tail, I'm kind of holding it along the back panel here of this. See how it's like got a flat spot? I'm sort of holding it along that flat spot in the back, okay? So what we're going to do is grab our working yarn, hold that tail. I'm using like my finger to sort of tack it down. And then we're going to work 32 single crochets. So keeping things, try to keep your tension snug so you do have a little bit of uniformity and neatness along your handle, okay? You don't want anything to look baggy in your loops, okay? So go in to the center of the ring, reach back, scoop up that yarn. You'll have 2 loops on your hook. Wrap yarn around the hook, bring it through both loops. Go nice and slow. It's a little bit to deal with, you know? Okay, now if you can see here, my tail kind of came forward as I did that. Just pull it back to around the back. It's totally fine. Keep holding that tail as on the edge as you work. Now, we're going to do this for a total of 32 times. So that was 1. Go back, scoop up the yarn and bring up a loop. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through both loops. We're going to go slow and then we'll pick up some speed. So that was 2. Go back, bring that loop up, yarn around hook, bring it through both loops. And you can give it a little tug with each stitch as you go. You can kind of straighten that tail out. It really wants to kind of like go everywhere here. All right, now if you also notice your stitches, if they're starting to like get goofy and slope downward, you can sort of roll them back up, okay? Just kind of straighten them out. You want them to be along that top edge. You can fix them at any time. So that was 3. Then we're going to do 4, bring up a loop, yarn around hook, bring it through both loops. And then 5. And then 6. 7. 8. All right, and now let's take a minute and kind of roll those back up to the top, smush everything in, and it looks nice and neat, okay? All right, 9. 10. 11. 12. 13. Pull that tail, roll it up to the top if you need to. 14. 15. 16. Okay, now we're at 16. I'm about halfway through, so I'm just going to let this tail go. It's been woven in all the way across here, so it's totally fine. We're just going to let that go. All right, now straightening things out if needed before we continue, smushing it together. Looks great, okay? So let's keep going. So 17. 18. 19. 20. A little bit more yarn here. $21, $22, $23, $24, $25, $26, $27, $28, $29, we're almost there, $30, $31, and $32. Okay, so take a minute before we keep going, and remember, roll these stitches up to the top, get everything straightened out, because we're going to be working into these stitches in just a minute. And if you notice here, I did mine to about the halfway point. So as you're straightening your stitches, there's a little bit more that needs, see how you can see a little bit of wood through there? You want to push that stuff in. Just make sure it's nice and neat. And now we're about the halfway point here. One thing I wanted to point out, sometimes, especially with the darker wood, the little flaws here, you might see a little flaw in the wood. See how I have a little flaw in my finish? Make sure you give it a once over, and if you have a little flaw like that, at this point, take your handle and just give it a spin, okay? And make sure what's left looks beautiful, okay? And then you can kind of, now they're a little too smushed, so I'm just kind of like eyeballing that halfway point, okay? All right, row 1 is complete. It looks wonderful. Okay, so let's mark some stitches. Now I'm going to just pull this loop out a little bit more so it won't pull through. So what we're going to do is we're going to mark our stitches. Now, if this bothers you, this tail, give it a strong tug and you can snip that off. Snip it up close, but try not to snip the stitches because then your whole thing will pull apart. Okay, so we're going to place some markers. So if we look at our other piece here, you can see it starts to increase here and here. You can see the line of where it sort of starts to flare out. Now I did that by counting 12 stitches in to the right and 12 stitches in on the left side, okay? So grab 2 stitch markers and you might need to turn it. See how you can see V's along the top here? Each one of those V's represents a stitch. So what you want to do is count 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And on the 12th one, put the stitch marker in that 12th stitch, okay? Just like that. Now we're going to do the same thing on this side. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I'm looking at V's, the V stitches that I see. They're not V stitches like crochet V stitches, but they look V-shaped stitches, if you will. See all these little V's at the top? And then when we line up our other one, those stitch markers, as you can see, line up with our other one, that's good news. Okay, so let's move on to row 2. Now we did our single crochets. Now we're going to start doing some half double crochets. Super easy. So put your hook back in that loop and snug it down. And then what we're going to do is chain 2. So this chain 2 we're doing here doesn't count as a stitch or anything. It's just going to get us the height that we need. So chain 2 and turn. Now in this very first stitch that you see these, they look like little knots at the top and there's like a hole there in between them, okay? So we're going to work in that very first stitch right at the base of our chain 2. So wrap yarn around hook, insert it into that stitch, bring up a loop. You'll have 3 loops on your hook. Wrap yarn around hook, bring it through all 3 loops. Just go through all 3 loops, nice and slow if you have to. Okay, and then you're just going to work a half double crochet in every stitch until you get to this first stitch marker. And then we're going to do something a little bit different. So we're going to half double crochet into the next stitch, half double crochet into the next stitch, and the next stitch all the way across until you get to that first stitch marker. Now you may notice as you're working into these stitches, it's gonna, see how I'm sort of pushing these apart again? You can see a little bit of wood. We'll straighten that back out later, okay? No worries, it's super easy. All right, half double crochet in the next stitch. We're just going all the way across here till we get to this first stitch marker. Now you'll just need stitch markers for this first row. If you want to keep using them, if it's hard to see where to put the increase, by all means feel free to keep using the stitch markers. Okay, so we're almost at our stitch marker and our increase is super, super easy. All right. Okay, so here we are at that last stitch before the stitch marker. Still working those half double crochets. Now, when you get to this one, you can pop this off. And in that stitch, what we're going to do is work a half double crochet, same stitch as before, then a chain one, then another half double crochet, all in that same stitch. And this is going to be where that magic shape is going to be created, okay? So let's keep going. Work across to the next stitch. Now, if you want to, I'll do this for visual purposes. You can kind of see it there. It's like a little opening now, but if it's hard to see or you really want to make sure you don't miss it, just throw a stitch marker back in there. You can do that for the first couple rows till you get used to it. So I'll throw that in just so you can see it really, really good. Okay, so work a half double crochet into the next stitch. And if it feels awkward to be working into these stitches along this ring, if it feels like stiff and tight, it's totally normal. It should feel a little bit awkward because you're working around a wood ring and you're using one, remember we were using one hook size smaller so we can get a little bit of sturdiness in our bag, okay? So we're just working half double crochets all the way across till we get to our next stitch marker. All right, so half double crochet in the next stitch, half double crochet in the next stitch. All right, now we have one more stitch and we're at our next stitch marker. So go ahead and work your stitch in there. And now we're at our little increase. So pop your stitch marker off. And I'm going to zoom out because our piece is growing a little bit. Now, once again, we're going to do our increase. So in that stitch where we just took out our stitch marker, work a half double crochet. And a chain one. And in that same stitch, another half double crochet. Okay, just like that. Now we just have stitches to work across, nothing fancy. Okay, so we're a half double in the next. Split my yarn there. We're gonna half double in the next stitch, half double in the next stitch, all the way across till you get to the end, okay? Oh, and I meant to, before we get too far, here's our little increase. So if you wanted to put your stitch marker there just to see, to really see it, you can go ahead and throw that in there. All right, so let's go back to our piece here. Half double in the next stitch, and so forth all the way across, okay? So what we did just now is what we'll be doing for the whole rest of our piece. And I will say, because of the bulky yarn and the larger hook that we're using, this is a really fast project. You just have to do 2 of them. Just working our last stitch for row 2, so we're just working a half double crochet in that last stitch, same thing we've been doing all the way across. And now we're ready to move on to row 3. So row 3 is the row that we'll be repeating for the rest of our panel here until it's big like this other one. So it's really simple. It's basically like row 2, but we're working into stitches this time instead of chains. Row 3 is very similar to row 2, so we're just going to chain 2. 1, 2 and turn our work. Now I left the stitch markers in place so you can see very clearly here where we're going to put those increases again. So we're just going to work a stitch, a half double crochet in each stitch across. So just work half double crochet all the way across here. Okay, I continued my half double crochets and we're almost at that next stitch marker. So work that last half double crochet before you get to the stitch marker. And then remember, in the last row we did, in that one stitch here, we did 2 half doubles and a chain 1. So we did a half double, chain 1, half double, and that created a chain 1 space. So in the written pattern on the blog and in my shop, it's considered a chain 1 space. That's how it's written. So what you can do when you get to your stitch marker is just pop that off for a minute. And then in that chain 1 space, we're going to do the same thing. Work a half double crochet, chain 1, and then a half double crochet, all in that same chain 1 space. And so that is going to start, the increases are going to start stacking, and see how they're like lined up nice and neat. And then what you can do, if you want to continue to see where you need to increase, you can throw your stitch marker back into that chain 1 space so you know to stop and work your increase there. If you can see it, you don't have to throw your stitch marker in at this point or as you move along, but I find it helpful. Okay, so work a half double crochet into the next stitch and in the next stitch and so forth until we get to that next stitch marker, okay? So keep working all the way across. I'm going to do this with you here. You can skip ahead if you want to see the next one. But we're just working a half double crochet in each stitch. And this handle is like dragging across my work surface here. I'm trying to lift it up off the table. All right, so 1 half double in each stitch all the way across until you get to this next stitch marker. Just like that. And here we are once again. So I'm going to just pop that off for a sec. And then right in that chain 1 space, we're going to work a half double crochet, chain 1, and a half double crochet, all in that same space. And then if you need to pop that back on there so you know for next time. And then we're just going to keep working across. So work your half doubles in each stitch all the way to the end of the row. And that's it. Okay, coming up to the end of row 3, I'm just working half double all the way to the end, and here we are at the last stitch. Now that one sometimes might be a little scrunched up because it's at the end there. You can sort of drill your hook in. Again, we went to a smaller hook size with our bulky yarn to give our bag some stiffness. So some of those stitches might be a little smushed, and that's okay. We need that sturdiness. Okay, so row 3 is complete. And then what I like to do, let me move my hook out of the way, is I like to, when I complete my rows, just kind of like sharpen up those points, get everything nice and straightened out. So then what you're going to do for the rest of your panel, to get it to the large size like this one, what we're going to do is repeat row 3 for a total of 16 times. So we just did 1, so you'll want to do 15 more for a total of 16 times for row 3. Okay, so we did row 1, row 2, and then you'll do row 3 16 times. Now you can keep putting your stitch markers in if that helps you, or you can kind of let them go after a while if you're starting to see, the increase and you don't need them anymore. It's up to you. So when we come back, I'm going to be finishing up this panel, and then we will look at everything and finish it all up so we can make 2 of them, make our second one as well. So keep going with row 3, and then when we come back, we will finish our panel up. All right, so I'm just working that very last stitch of our row, and our panel has grown quite a bit. So what we want to do now is to cut the yarn and fasten up. We're going to be seaming this, but I'm not going to start at this point, so there's no point of leaving this tail on. Sometimes when we seam, we can just leave a long tail and seam it right then and there, but I'm not going to be seaming it from this point. We're going to start in a different spot. So what we want to do is wrap the yarn around the hook and bring it through the loop. Now, we only had one ball per panel. Now, let me just zoom way out so you can see how beautiful and how interesting. I think the shape is really unique. So I have just enough yarn here to seam later. So if you wove this end, I think I did this earlier with my other panel. Usually when we do crochet alongs, off camera, I usually make multiple projects of our crochet alongs. So I'll have a couple going here. But what you want to do, I did this earlier in the video, but if you want to see it again, if you have this tail that you wove along, give it a nice strong tug and a little snip, and that tail will just kind of disappear. And then you'll have one tail down here. Again, we want to get this tail out of the way because next time we rejoin to work on our bag, we're going to seam it. So I wanted to get all the ends out of the way first. And we're just going to go right in the middle of these plies, just like this, in one direction with our needle. Pull it snug to sort of get that knot out of the way, and then come back in the other direction with our needle. Just work it in the best you can. We purposely made our fabric kind of stiff for our piece here. And then straighten it out if need be. Give it a little snip, and that tail will disappear. Now, I also wanted to point out, sometimes around our handle here, let me zoom in so you can really see it. See how it gets a little fuzzy? That's from it, you know, holding it in your hands and working it, and sometimes it gets a little like fuzz halo. So you can very, very carefully, without cutting the stitches, you can sort of give it a little fuzzy haircut. If you use dark handles like I did, it's a little bit more noticeable. So just be very careful not to cut your stitches, but you can kind of cut that fuzz off a little bit. Okay, so our panel is complete and it looks wonderful. Now you can keep going as long as you want. You can make this a huge bag, or you can stop sooner, and I'm just going to fold this in so you can sort of get an idea of what it looks like when it's smaller. If you want like a little mini handbag, you can sort of fold it in as well. Okay, so I wanted something with a little bit of room in it to tote around things. So what we're going to do now, before we join for the next part of our crochet along where we're going to be seaming, you'll want to make a second one. So grab your ring and your second ball of yarn, and you're just going to repeat all these steps for your second panel. So keep going, make the second one. Now if you're after the same dimensions as me, I got from the top here, the opening of the ring straight down is exactly 9 inches. And then from point to point, I just went straight across here, is 19.5 inches. So if you're after the same dimensions as me, you can kind of go by that. But I repeated row 2 17 times. And then we did 19.5 inches across, 9 inches tall from the crocheted part, not the handle, but the crocheted part to the bottom. So join me for the next part of our cowl, where we are going to take our 2 panels and we're going to seam them together, and we'll have an actual bag at that point. The part after that, what we're going to do is we're going to take our bright color scrap yarn, and we're going to make a little charm, little hangy charm for this with some just easy pom-poms and tassels. I'm going to show you how to do both of those. No fancy tools needed. We can do both of those in our hands. And then we're going to, the final part of our crochet along will be a recap. So a lot of you like to remake some of these items. So I'm going to have a recap, and I do like a blog post, and I put all the parts, all the links to all the parts and all the embedded videos and everything. So it's all in one place. Okay. So go ahead and make your 2 panels, and we will rejoin for our next part. And you can see the schedule with the actual dates and the parts and what we're doing on what day on the blog, and the link is down below. But join us for the next part. We're going to be constructing this and seaming it up. If you haven't joined the Ravelry group and the Facebook group, the links are down below for that as well. And you can kind of show off what you're doing. You can ask questions. It's a really fun, kind of positive space to hang out. So the links are down below for that. I will see you for the next part and we will seam everything together. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure and click the subscribe button to get all the latest Fiber Flux video updates. Thanks again.